So Elizabeth and Darcy are the perfect couple. Or are they? What would the Regency era have thought? Did they have the correct dynamics? Are they falling in line with the gender roles? Are they actually living up to Regency era ideals of what it meant to be a man and a woman? That is the topic we're going into here in today's video. My name is Ellie Dashwood, and this is my channel where we talk about history and literature. If you like either of those things, please subscribe. So first up, let's talk about a lady's purpose in life. I think one of the very important key things to always remember with the Regency era is that it was a deeply religious society. As we've talked about in past videos, almost everyone belonged to the Church of England, and those that didn't usually belonged to another Christian religion, and those that didn't were a very small minority of the population. Now that's important because a woman's entire view of the world and herself and her place in it was entirely defined by her religious beliefs. So a girl in the Regency era growing up had her entire life drenched in religion. So, for example, again, everyone around her believes more or less the same as her. This creates an immense amount of social pressure, right? That reinforces what she's being taught from birth. If we follow her throughout her day, we also see that all of the forms of media and information that she takes in also reinforces the same ideas. So for example, her parents give her religious instruction. When she goes to church on Sunday, that's the same. Her governess in the classroom, it's the same. And then when she has like a little downtime and she picks up a novel, guess what? The heroine of that novel is also the same religion and also thinks the same things about a woman's purpose in life and is also very religious. After reading that novel, the girl picks up a magazine. And guess what, guys? Most ladies' journals in the time period were not carrying articles like how to get hot abs before summer. They were carrying articles like thoughts on female chastity. And then at some point, I'm sure her cousin, who is a clergyman, is going to come over and be like, hey, I'm going to read you Fordyce's sermons, which was a form of conduct book, also what we would think of as a self-help book. So again, if you go to the self-help section of the circulating library, they're all religious books. And so that is why when it comes to Regency era women, their realities were so incredibly shaped by religion to an aspect that most modern readers can't even conceive of, even if you are religious. Because even if you're very religious and say you do a lot with your religion, you're still being constantly bombarded by a billion different sources with a billion different ideas and backgrounds and, angles on things in your everyday life, where Regency era girls were not. Like, this was their reality. And it was a reality that definitely told them exactly who they needed to be. Because one underlying factor of a lot of their religious training and a lot of the media they were taking in was telling them, this is how to be the perfect woman. Like, these are the standards. Now, please, go live up to that. So, what were these standards that Regency era women were supposed to live up to? What was a woman's purpose in life? Well, that is ironically well summed up for us by Henry Crawford in Mansfield Park. He says this: I consider the blessing of a wife as most justly described in those discreet lines of the poet, heaven's last best gift. So Henry Crawford is being a little bit ironic here when he emphasizes the word last, as in last best gift, as in God's giving man so many great gifts and then the last one is woman. However, this quote, which is originally from Paradise Lost written by Milton, was usually applied in a much more like gallant and romantic way in the era. It was like, you are like the pinnacle gift, right? Like there were all these other gifts and then the last one was you. However, what's really fascinating about this quote is that, again, it comes from Paradise Lost. So if you're not familiar with Paradise Lost, it's this epic poem where Milton goes through and he reimagines the Genesis account of the creation of Adam and Eve and their fall from grace. However, he adds a lot, right? There's so much more in Paradise Lost than is in the actual original Genesis account, including this line from Adam, who originally says it in the poem, which the full line says about Eve that she's heaven's last best gift, my ever new delight. Now, that line would have been read by almost all Regency era young ladies. Milton was more or less required reading for any girl whose parents cared anything about her education. Like, he was one of the go-tos. Like, of all the books your daughter has to read, Paradise Lost is one of them. So girls would have been very familiar with this idea that woman was God's gift to man to make him happy. And that was really the Regency era idea of it. That was a woman's purpose in life. She was to be a wife and a mother and to make her husband's life happy and better. Now, she did this in two important ways. One was by making him happy, creating a very happy domestic sphere there at home. If you're familiar with my video on what was the Victorian era, we talked about the separate spheres idea, where a woman's domain was inside the house with the children and with the housekeeping and the servants, while a man's domain was outside the house. So he was out there doing politics and business and ruling the known world. Now, if you're really curious about the creating a happy home aspect of a woman's life, go check out my video on, I think it's called A Day in the Life of Mrs. Darcy, where we break down exactly what Elizabeth Bennet would have been doing once married and as the mistress of Pemberley. But let's move on to the second very key aspect of women's purpose, and that is to make men better. So one of women's core purpose was to refine and polish and elevate men. Now, this went everywhere on the spectrum, from reforming rakes, like we talked about in the last video. Like, since this was one of the main purposes in a woman's life was to improve men, you can see partially where that idea of like, you know who I'm going to improve? I'm going to improve a rake really comes from. All the way over to, if you've ever like met a guy who grew up with a lot of sisters, someone might be like, wow, you can really tell this guy grew up with a lot of sisters because he's just like very kind and considerate and knows how to interact with women. That is also part of a woman improving men. The basic idea was that without women, men would just be over there being rough and unrefined. Right? They need a woman's touch, which is something that is actually discussed in Fordyce's Sermons, which is, of course, that book that Mr. Collins wants to read to his fair cousins, and that the Bennets do just have laying around their house. So basically, the Bennet girls would have been very aware of this aspect of their duty as a woman, which is to improve men. Now, to get an even better idea of this concept, here is what one Victorian-era writer had to say about it. We have seen that the highest civilization to which we have attained has been through the softening and refining influence of women. As woman has been foremost in all human progress, as men have gone backward in civilization wherever her influence has not been favorably exerted. As woman, joined to man, makes up the fullness of his nature, so that he can by no possibility develop his true character until woman assumes her proper relative position. The perfection of her character is necessary to the harmony of the species. That is correct. Without women, men are just going to be over there, never reaching their full potential. They need her, or they're just gonna like go backwards, right? They're just gonna degrade in quality over time. Now, of course, something else the author was talking about in this quote is the woman's need to perfect her character, to have an elevated character. And that is one of the reasons we see young ladies' education really highlighting things like polish, refinement, accomplishments, right? She is becoming that very accomplished, civilized, human being that can go into a marriage and then help elevate her rough husband up, soften his manners, and make him the man that he was truly meant to be. Now, of course, we're going to talk more about a woman's need for accomplishment in a future video. However, it also does make me think about this video's sponsor, Craftsy. So Craftsy offers over 2,000 classes for those who want to elevate their character and skills. What I love about Craftsy is being able to slip into a cozy world of creativity. They offer so many fascinating classes across topics like knitting and cooking and painting and more. I've started enjoying the class Picture Book Illustration Animal Characters, because wouldn't it be so incredibly cool to be able to illustrate a picture book? Like all Craftsy classes, it's taught by an expert, which is one of my favorite parts of this platform, because if somebody is teaching you something, you want them to know what they're doing. And I really love that he breaks down not just step by step what he's doing, but like the thought behind it, and gives us tips and tricks and lessons he's learned over time. It feels like I'm not only being handed practical skills, but also years of experience. So if you would like to add some more inspiration and accomplishment to your life, then definitely check out Craftsy. The first 1,000 people that click the link in the description below can get their first year of Craftsy Premium for $1.49. So definitely click the link in the description below, and remember, this offer is only good for new members. Now, back to the video. So really, improving men would have been one of the main things a woman felt was her purpose in life, right? All of civilization is going to fall apart unless she elevates herself and helps up the men around her. And this really goes throughout the entire male lifespan. Of course, as a child, a mother is the main one responsible for helping a young man grow up to his potential, along with his sisters. Sisters were also seen as a very key element. And so we actually see a lot of affection brothers have for their sisters in Jane Austen novels. So for example, in Northanger Abbey, James Morland and his sister Catherine are actually pretty close. And we see in Mansfield Park, Fanny, when she goes to live with the Bertrams, is really taken under the wing of Edmund Bertram, who kind of treats her like another sister as they're growing up. And of course, for men, that was part of their duty, as we'll talk about later, is taking care of their sisters and the women in their lives. But also, by associating with them and being close to them, they were being made better men. Right? Like, you need your mom, and you need your sisters, and you need your wife. Otherwise, you will never reach your full potential. Because just as a Regency girl growing up in this era would have been very aware of her role and purpose as a woman, men around her were also very aware of a woman's purpose and role, including this next aspect. So a Regency era girl reading Milton's Paradise Lost would have come across another passage that taught another very important key Regency era concept. Let's read it and see what it is. So Milton describes a woman as, "For well I understand, in the prime end of nature, her the inferior, in the mind and inward faculties, which most excel. In outward, also her resembling less his image who made both, and less expressing the character of that dominion given o'er other creatures." So in this passage from Paradise Lost, which is not in the original Genesis account, I might just add, we see a woman being described as inferior to man mentally, physically. She is less made in God's image. She does not have as much dominion over the planet as man does. And that was a basic core concept of Regency era life, that men were just inherently superior to women. Now, of course, that belief dramatically impacted how the genders related to each other. So, for example, one Regency era writer described the ideal marriage this way: "The idea of exalting man above the whole creation, without exception and without an equal, is very grand and noble. Nor can it be thought much degradation to woman to obey so distinguished a lord. He is not her lord only, but the lord of the whole creation. Whenever a union happens between a man of noble mind and humane temper and a modest woman disposed to acquiesce to his supremacy, but with sufficient mind to understand the value of his superiority, perhaps the most perfect state of human society is accomplished. Man, the Lord of all creation. What's really fascinating about this quote, though, is it comes from an article that is actually quite liberal in the era. So one of the main arguments this writer was trying to make is, while if a man is noble-minded and humane in temper, this is a brilliant idea. Unfortunately, not all men are noble-minded and humane in temper. While some lords of creation are great, other ones are less than could be desired. And it's also very interesting because she makes this argument that basically, while man is definitely inherently created superior to woman, the difference between them is not as wide as a lot of men would like to think. The author even pointed out that there's things that Regency era men did to artificially increase this gap between them. By limiting girls' education and their ability to own property, they created artificial inferiority for women. Basically, it's like, yes, while heaven made us lower than you, you guys then pushed us down even further from where we should actually be. And we definitely did see this idea in the era that women needed better education and more respect, while also at the same time, this basic idea that they were fundamentally made inferior to men. So of course, in any society, on any issue that's kind of contentious, there's sort of the spectrum, right, between the liberal and the conservative. Now, of course, depending on what family a girl grew up in, she would have either been hearing the conservative version of this idea or the liberal version. Of course, the conservative was one that definitely widened that gap between men and women. It's like, no, men are super higher than women. While over here on the liberal side, it was like, no, that gap is there. Men definitely made superior. But women are just like a little bit lower. Like, we're pretty much up there, almost next to you guys. Or as the same author put it, Providence in its bounty bestows on man an adapted and appropriate companion, made only so much weaker than himself as was requisite to produce the sweetest harmony of dependence and protection. Ah, the sweet harmony of dependence and protection. But how is Pride and Prejudice measuring up to this? Do we see hints of all of these ideas in the story? Well, actually, yes. Let's look at Mr. Bennet's advice to Lizzy. So after Mr. Darcy asks Mr. Bennet for his daughter's hand in marriage, Mr. Bennet pulls Lizzy aside and tells her this. I know your disposition, Lizzy. I know that you could be neither happy nor respectable unless you truly esteemed your husband, unless you looked up to him as a superior. Your lively talents would place you in the greatest danger in an unequal marriage. You could scarcely escape discredit and misery. My child, let me not have the grief of seeing you unable to respect your partner in life. You know not what you are about. So first, when we look at this, we might feel like we're getting some mixed signals here. On one hand, Mr. Bennet is like, you need to be able to look up to your husband as a superior. And then on the other hand, he's like, you shouldn't be in an unequal marriage. How do we reconcile these two things? Well, if you've seen my video on Did Lizzy Really Love Darcy, you know that the idea of an equal marriage had nothing really to do with women's rights or gender equality, and it had more to do with compatibility, right? So for example, a lively, talented girl like Elizabeth would have been miserable with Mr. Collins, right? That was a complete mismatch. Where here, we see her well suited to Darcy personality-wise. Meanwhile, when we go back to the idea of her looking up to him as a superior, Mr. Bennet is very concerned about Lizzy ever marrying someone who is less quick-witted than she is. He is aware his daughter is very smart, and he's like, you need to marry a guy smarter than you. Otherwise, how are you going to look up to him as the Lord of all creation? And this is an inherent problem with Lizzy ever marrying Mr. Collins, right? She cannot do this ideal. You know who's not doing this ideal? Charlotte Lucas. I want you guys all to try to imagine Charlotte ever looking up to Mr. Collins as her lord and the lord of all creation. Can you imagine this? I mean, I could imagine her saying it to him to get whatever she wants, but for real, I don't see this in her heart. Now, while Charlotte and Mr. Collins' marriage is over there failing Regency era ideals, what about Elizabeth? How is she doing on this front? So after Lydia has run away and Elizabeth is just there contemplating the fact that she is never going to be able to get together with Darcy now. Right? There is no way he's going to be renewing his addresses. Her sister is eloping with that terrible guy he hates. But this does now make her realize that she would have actually really liked to marry him. The book says she began now to comprehend that he was exactly the man who, in disposition and talents, would most suit her. His understanding and temper, though unlike her own, would have answered all her wishes. It was a union that must have been to the advantage of both. By her ease and liveliness, his mind might have been softened, his manners improved. From his judgment, information, and knowledge of the world, she must have received a benefit of greater importance. But no such happy marriage could now teach the admiring multitude what connubial felicity really was. So there we have Lizzy, dreaming about this wonderful, perfect marriage that will never be. On one hand, she would be softening his manners, which was an essential part of her role as a woman. And on the other hand, he would be the superior in judgment and knowledge, which was his role as the superior man. They would have completely fulfilled the Regency era ideal, right? They were going to be it. She was softening, he was being superior, but it was never going to happen because Lydia ran away. But what's really fascinating about the relationship between Lizzy and Darcy is that they both, in some way, start fulfilling their very essential roles before they're ever married. So, for example, while she imagines her marrying him and softening his manners, she had already contributed a lot to that with his whole personality makeover he did after she called him out for not being a gentleman. Now, here's how he describes her effect on him after his marriage proposal is accepted, and they're rehashing their backstory. He says, "Such I was from 8 to 28, and such I might still have been but for you, dearest, loveliest Elizabeth. What do I not owe you?" So if we go back to that idea that men can only achieve their full greatness through the influence of women in their life, that's what Elizabeth has already done for Darcy. And of course, if they get married, she will continue to help him grow to even greater heights. Of course, we don't get a lot of information about Lizzy and Darcy's life after marriage, except for a few little details in the book. But they also all line up with Elizabeth's role as a woman being fulfilled. So for example, the book says, Pemberley was now Georgiana's home, and the attachment of the sisters was exactly what Darcy had hoped to see. They were able to love each other, even as well as they intended. So here we see this picture of domestic happiness. Darcy now gets to live with his sister and his wife, and they're best friends, and he's so happy about this. So again, on the point of making men happy and creating domestic bliss for them, Elizabeth's kind of slaying that. Meanwhile, Elizabeth goes even further and takes a very dramatic step. Let's read. Lady Catherine was extremely indignant on the marriage of her nephew, and as she gave way to all the genuine frankness of her character, in her reply to the letter which announced its arrangement, she sent him language so very abusive, especially of Elizabeth, that for some time all intercourse was at an end. But at length, by Elizabeth's persuasion, he was prevailed on to overlook the offense and seek a reconciliation. So here we have Elizabeth being such the moral center of the home, the one helping Darcy reach new heights of softness and excellence, that she convinces him to make friends with Lady Catherine. Which, if you think about it, is quite a lot that Elizabeth, the one who Lady Catherine hates, is like, yes, you should reconcile with your aunt. Family and peace is important. And so again, you want to know who's living up to the Regency era ideal of a woman and a wife? Elizabeth Bennet. But how is Mr. Darcy doing? Is he the Regency ideal of a man? Like Spider-Man's uncle would say, with great power comes great responsibility. Or in the Regency era, with great respect comes expectations. But what were some of these expectations? Well, if we go back to that quote we read about the dynamics between men and women, it said that woman was created inferior so that they could have the sweetest harmony of dependence and protection. So dependence and protection. So basically a guy needed to provide and protect. And we definitely see those aspects a lot in Jane Austen's novels. I have made such an insane number of videos about Mr. Darcy's money that I'm pretty sure people think I'm obsessed with Mr. Darcy's money. So I don't think we need to rehash his ability to financially provide for Elizabeth. Now, what about that second factor of protection? Now, the term protection in the era was actually much more complex, but it did involve like actual physical protection. So obviously, like if a gentleman and a lady were walking down the street and someone ran up and tried to like attack her, it was the guy's job to defend her. And if she didn't have a gentleman with her, a nearby gentleman should ideally defend her, right? Because it's just like all men's job to protect all women, especially any woman they are related to or close to. However, why? Exactly why is it men's job to protect women? Well, a Victorian era writer gives us insight into that. Masculine superiority is incontestable, and with the superiority should come protection. Women have one right, perhaps only that one. They have a right, founded on nature, equity, and religion, to the protection of man. Power is on the side of men. Power of body, power of mind, power of position. With that power should come not only the fact, but the instinct of protection. So basically, by nature, men are stronger, smarter, and in a higher position, and thereby they need to use that power responsibly and protect all the women of their acquaintance. So this brings us all back to Mr. Darcy. How does Mr. Darcy do at protecting? Honestly, he is already doing great at that before they're even engaged, when he tracks down Lydia. So when Lydia runs away with Mr. Wickham, that presents a massive threat to Elizabeth. It's going to ruin her reputation. It's going to ruin her family's reputation. It's going to sink her chances of finding a reputable match. And yeah, it's not good, as Mr. Collins so kindly points out in his letter. Howsoever that may be, you are grievously to be pitied. In which opinion, I am not only joined by Mrs. Collins, but likewise by Lady Catherine and her daughter, to whom I have related the affair. They agree with me in apprehending that this false step in one daughter will be injurious to the fortunes of all the others. For who, as Lady Catherine herself condescendingly says, will connect themselves with such a family? Now, while this is Mr. Collins saying it, he's also not wrong. This is a massive threat to the rest of Elizabeth's life. And you know who steps in to help defend her and protect her from that threat? Mr. Darcy. And of course, we know that Mr. Darcy tracking down Lydia, making them get married, helping them financially, is all done without him ever telling Elizabeth. right? He just wants to protect her. And he does all of this behind the scenes. But of course, she thanks him. And when she does, she thanks him for their whole family. But he responds this way. If you will thank me, let it be for yourself alone, that the wish of giving happiness to you might add force to the other inducements which led me on, I shall not attempt to deny. But your family owe me nothing. Much as I respect them, I believe I thought only of you. He thought only of her, and he's already doing excellent at this requirement for the ideal Regency man and husband of protecting. So, do Lizzy and Darcy live up to the Regency era ideals for men and women? Yes. Yes, they do. As we clearly see, Lizzy is out there softening Darcy and giving him domestic bliss, and Darcy's out there protecting and providing. They're just being ideal, the perfect couple. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of these Regency era ideals? Do you think you would have lived up to them, or would you not have? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, guys, keep being awesome, because you're awesome. Bye!